Today we're going to discuss how to address some of the smaller technical issues that you may see, and then the approach that you need to take when you're working with something that's pretty detailed and pretty subtle. So the specific question I've received is, how do you fix a thumb first entry on freestyle? And while we'll use that as kind of the talking point to go through this can be extended to any sort of technical issue that's pretty small. It doesn't respond particularly well to many of the strategies we've already discussed. We'll talk about what you can do and how to approach the problem. So before we get into some of the fixes, the first thing you need to do is ask yourself two separate questions. And the first one is this actually a problem? So is this directly affecting alignment? Is it directly affecting timing? Is it directly affecting propulsion? Is it causing swimmers pain? If the answer is no to all of those questions, from my perspective, I would probably leave it alone. I'd probably not address it because it's not impacting the major things that are holding swimmers back in terms of skill. And obviously, if they're injured, they're not going to be able to train. And so that is a valid consideration. So if it's not affecting the major skills, it's not causing them pain, I probably wouldn't address the problem. If the answer is yes, it is affecting one of these different areas, then you have to ask yourself how much. If it's really small, it's not really making much of a difference, again, I probably wouldn't address it because there are bigger things to worry about and we only have so much time and so much energy. Now, if the answer is yes, it is having a major impact on either their alignment, their propulsion, their timing, or the presence of pain, then I probably would go about fixing it. But the first question is really, is it worth it? Is it worth addressing this change? And that's because it's all about opportunity cost. If you work in one area, that means you're not going to work in another area. And it doesn't make sense to chase after pennies when you could be chasing after dollars somewhere else. So whatever change you make, it needs to be worth it. So the second question you need to ask yourself is, why are they doing it? What's causing them to move in this way? While you may think it's an awareness issue, that's not necessarily always the case. They may be limited in their range of motion. They may be limited in their strength. They may be limited in the shapes of their bones and just how they're put together. And these are all reasons that may cause them to move in a certain way. And while it may look like a mistake, it may actually be the best solution for them. And so you have to kind of think about that, or at least consider it, because if you're trying to change something that actually is working pretty well for them, even though it's not ideal or optimal, but because of some other limitation, if you try to change that, you're probably going to make the situation worse. You're going to ask them to do something that they really can't do, and it's going to leave everyone frustrated. And that's definitely something we want to avoid. So if you give it some thought and you realize, well, they may not be able to fix that, you got to be really careful trying to address it, because you may actually make the situation worse. So for example, if someone's not really great with their streamline, but it's because they have no range of motion through their shoulders and their back, trying to coach them or teach them into a better position isn't going to work because they literally can't get into that position. So if you keep running into a brick wall, you keep trying to get change, but it just never really happens, that might be why, and you might just want to leave it alone. So we asked ourselves our two questions, and let's say we passed in both fronts. We decided it is something that's important to work on, and we decided that it's not really so much a structural issue, it's something that they can actually improve. Now, what doesn't work? You've probably already tried to constantly remind them to do it differently, and that probably doesn't work because it's asking them to focus on one small detail for a long period of time, and really that's not how humans are wired, certainly not kids. They can't remember it constantly. Frankly, you can't remember it constantly because you're worried about other stuff, and it just doesn't really work as well as it should. I'm not going to belabor this point because you've probably already experienced it yourself. So we know that that's not going to work. So we have to figure out something else. So the solution I like to use, especially when there's not a clear-cut answer. So for instance, if it's a breathing problem, you can just throw a paddle on their head and that's probably going to fix it. But something like this, where we're talking about the hand position on entry, what I like to do is have them explore a lot of different options. So have them enter the water in all sorts of ways. Go pinky down, go completely flat. Have them really explore all sorts of different ways, and you can have them change it by lap. You can have them change it by repetition. You can have one hand entering thumb down and one hand entering pinky down, and really force them to feel the differences between all of those. And the more you can give them lots of different options, the more effective it's going to be. Another thing you can do with this specific problem is have them swim with closed fists, have them swim with hooks, have them swim with OK sign, have them do it with paddles, have them hold paddles upside down, all sorts of different ways to do it. And that way they're going to feel all these different options for how to interact with the water and how to enter the water. And if you give them lots of different options, it's more likely that they're going to pick the option that's going to be most effective for them. A lot of times they get stuck doing the same thing because they don't realize that they can do other things. And it's not even a conscious thing. their brain and their body doesn't really perceive these other options, so they don't take them. And while you're using all these different entries, these different hand positions, you want to do it at different speeds, do it at different stroke counts, and change that up a lot. So you're trying to give them as much variability as you can, and that's going to help them learn, help them figure out a different way to enter the water. It could also be a recovery issue. So what you can do is have them recover with really bent arms, really straight arms. You could have them recover with kind of like hook arms. Have them do different things like that too, and have them do it at different arms on the same time. So one arm's bent, one arm straight. Have them recover like that. So again, you're exposing them to a lot of different options. And then the hope is they'll start to figure out and get attuned to and start to learn how to perceive different options, and then they can start to use them. So with any of these small issues, it's about identifying what might be the problem and then trying to give them a range of different experiences, a range of different options around that movement. And so when it's the hand position and the entry, change the different entries, change the recoveries, change everything, and let them experience a lot of different things. And you're going to have to commit to doing this every day. If you really want to change, a couple drills isn't going to make it happen. And so with this particular exercise, having them explore different hand positions and different entries, you can kind of do that during normal training. And that's going to take care of the different speeds, the different stroke counts, the different variability as well. And so that's a way to get them to make these changes and help them figure out different ways to move without really disrupting the flow of practice or having them do something totally different. And you don't want them just doing drills and not doing much of anything from a fitness perspective. You can also include it in the warm-up and the warm-down, and these are all different ways to implement this change and start to get a change without disrupting training. So that's the basic approach I take. Unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. It's not a do this for this solution, but it can be really effective for a lot of these small changes that you're trying to make that are otherwise resistant to change and really hard to fix. And so if you haven't noticed, this might sound like a lot of work. And that's why we asked that question in the beginning, is this really worth it? There are always going to be some things that just don't look right, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily worth the effort to change it because there are other things that you got to take care of. In this particular case, I don't know that I necessarily have an answer. I haven't seen this swimmer swim. I don't know what else is going on in their training. I don't know what else is happening with them. So if you find yourself in this situation, you got to really think hard about what's going to be most important and what's going to be the most valuable use of your time. But if you do think it's worth the effort, and it very well may be, you want to give them a bunch of different options and force them to explore those options, and hopefully they'll pick out a newer and more effective version of what they're doing. And again, if it still doesn't change, they may be doing it for a reason, and you might just want to leave it alone. Personally, I tend to leave these problems alone as much as possible, preferring to focus on the things that I know will improve performance. Alignment, timing, getting more propulsion, those are the things I know make a huge difference. So unless the skill is interfering with one of those, I tend to avoid trying to fix it. However, sometimes it is obviously causing an impact in one of those areas, and then you got to do something about it. When that's the case, and you can't come up with any way to kind of force them into the right positions, such as like paddle cap freestyle as an example, then you're going to have to get them to explore a lot of different options. That's the approach that I found best for some of these smaller issues that you really want to address and you really want to improve. So I hope that's helpful, and as always, keep it simple.